Okay, so it looks like it's 2:30 right now. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick introduction. My name's Lauren. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager for NCCS. And I'm really thankful that you guys are here. Really appreciate your time. And I'm here with Desiree Walker. She is part of our CPAT steering committee. So she helped plan the agenda for today's symposium, or excuse me, our entire symposium. And she has amazing credentials as an advocate. And she's going to talk a little bit why she does what she does. And we also have a chat function. So feel free to engage with both of us by asking questions or sharing your stories in your chat box, and have fun. I'm going to take it away to you, Desiree.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Good afternoon. And for those of you who might be on a different coast, I'll say good morning potentially. I am here in New York City. And so what I'd like to do before I share my slide is just to say thank you to NCCS for this CPAT Symposium. I know it's a virtual one. I definitely was just telling Lauren how I miss being in DC right now, but I am thankful that the symposium could be held because I find it to be a very informative time. And I'm sorry that I won't get an opportunity to meet you, but I definitely look forward to meeting you in the future. So I am going to share my slide, my screen. So I have been given the great pleasure of presenting today. And the title of my workshop, my presentation, is Finding Your Voice in Advocacy. And I know many of us might wish we were actually traveling and seeing these shells up close and personal, but I thought this was one of the nice things that we could do to be uplifting. But also the significance for me is that although cancer has brought us together, the journey is very different for each of us. And each of us still has an opportunity to make a difference and have an impact. And so here we go with the time that I have been allotted. I'm a big quotes person. And so I want to share this quote from Mother Teresa that says, "I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create ripples." And so I know that advocacy is something that, you know, many of us have grown to love, but at the same time, it's not something that we can do solo. And so I think that it's important for us to know that we do have an impact with whatever efforts we make. But I also encourage you to align yourself with like-minded people, as well as patient advocate organizations, because together we can have much greater impact when we do so. So this afternoon, I'm going to share a little bit about my advocacy journey. I always like to say that it's important to know, have the same definition. So I'm going to give you my definition of what is advocacy so that we're starting off on the same platform. I'm going to talk about why self-awareness is important. There are definitely soft skills and communication skills that are needed. And there are various types of advocacy as it has been outlined in the earlier presentations and panels. We have the fortune of media to help us get messages out. So I'm going to talk about how media can be used. And one of the things that I like to say, you know, those of us who have come into the advocacy world based on a diagnosis, I cannot overemphasize the need for self-care. It's not a question of do you, it's a must. So I'm going to talk about that. And then I'm going to provide you with some tips that are helpful to be an effective advocate. And then we're going to, with the remaining 15 minutes, we're going to open it up for some questions and answers. And I thank Lauren in advance for keeping her eye on the chat box. because I will say that I am challenged to share screen, talk, and do that. So thank you, Lauren. My advocacy journey. This actually, for those of you, I will say that this actually is an image to show you peaks and valleys. And I've put together the various things that I have done. I think earlier today, Shelley spoke about self-advocacy, and I think that that's where I learned to have a voice. Because I too, as Allison mentioned, was diagnosed as a young woman, and based on where things were in medicine at the time, didn't know that young women could get breast cancer because it was something that wasn't believed to be so. In addition to that, as you can see, I am African American. And at the time, they said that African Americans had a low incidence, but we had a high mortality. So technically, you know, if I went based on all what was said, I shouldn't have heard the words, "you have breast cancer." But the reality is I did. And the reality is that I did not want to be passive as I took this journey. I wanted to try and inform myself as much as I could so that I could actually build the healthcare team that was important for me. In addition to that, I wanted to be able to have the pointed questions so that I could get the facts from my doctors so that I could be part of the decision making and feel empowered to make an informed decision. And I'd like to say that after, and one of the things that I often say that when we're newly diagnosed, we're really fired up. And we often want to get out there and do something and make a difference. And we all want to have a purposeful life. But one of the things that is important is for you to initially to take the time to heal. You cannot be effective. You cannot make a huge difference if you are not well. And so I often say that people should wait till they're at least a year and a half out of treatment so that they are ready and they're strong and they're able to accomplish. I know earlier and then I realize that at times some people are de novo and so they're metastatic from the start. And so therefore time may not be a luxury as it may be for others. However, I think it's important for you to also understand where you are and what your abilities are to make impact. And so I then started doing community outreach, trying to educate the community on breast cancer, but also to say, here's a face of a young person diagnosed with breast cancer. And I did that for several years with an organization in New York called the Witness Project of Harlem. I later started working with another organization, Sisters in Spirit, and then later following that, Share. And as one thing would lead to another, one day I got the news that unfortunately I had a recurrence. And that was after 8 years. And that was really a defining point for me because I had been told that if I got to 5 years, that was the milestone. But here we were at 8 years and I heard the words, "Your cancer has returned." And so I had to then educate myself from a different perspective. And I took time to learn about the science of breast cancer, to understand what dormant cells were. And with that, I decided to go to my first Hill Day or Lobby Day in Albany. And there I met other advocates who said to me, if you really want to get involved in legislative advocacy, here's a couple of organizations that you can get involved in order to educate yourself so you could be effective. And so I participated with the National Breast Cancer Coalition's Project Lead, and I had done many trainings with them as well. And having that 5-day intensive training with Project Lead actually led me to become a consumer reviewer with the DoD, a peer reviewer with PCORI, and then it started to connect me also with other research advocates. And then I think I started wearing every type of advocacy hat I could with my ultimate goal to address health inequities. So that's my story. I don't really encourage everyone to say wear so many hats. but it's something that for me, I wanted to be able to have a seat at the table. And I noticed that the table, all of the tables in terms of advocacy, whether it's outreach, research, or legislative, there was a seat. And I needed to be there to make sure that the voice for the voiceless were heard. So how I defined advocacy is taking action. Advocacy is speaking and acting on behalf of yourself, self-advocacy, or others. We could also say it's the support of another person, place, or thing. And I would encourage you, NCCS has an amazing website with a wealth of information. And so this link here will let you have NCCS's definition of what is advocacy, and would encourage you to check it out. But I also think that it's important, if you want to be an advocate, we have to take a look in the mirror. We really have to know who we are. We have to understand ourselves, because everything is not for everyone, but it's important for you to decide what is the right fit for you so that you can feel good about what you're doing and at the same time be able to sustain and have impact. So a couple of questions that I would throw out to you to say these are things to think about and have honest conversation with yourself. When someone suggests you do something, do you ask yourself if it's the right fit before acting on it? Or do you just jump in the pool without even checking whether or not it's for you? How do you educate yourself about the issues? Is it because you do research, or is it because somebody said to you, this is what's going on? I also say, how do you view yourself? Are you confident or are you timid? Have you ever experienced oppression or a stigma? And if so, can you talk about it? And are you comfortable disclosing your diagnosis and any of the realities you've experienced, no matter how painful? Can you talk about it without becoming emotional at the same time? It's also important to know your personality. When you're faced with a problem, do you take it head on, or do you hibernate and run? If you had to get on the phone to resolve a problem, are you prepared? What tone do you use? Are you comfortable talking on the phone? Or if you chose to be a letter writer, what are your letter writing skills? And I would just ask you to make your top 3 choices on how you deal with resolving problems. And at the end of the day, if a problem isn't solved right away, do you quit or do you persevere? I'd also say, ask yourself these questions. What do you feel is the most effective way? What do you feel most effective when trying to solve a problem? How satisfied are you with the way you react when something goes wrong? How confident are you in analyzing the problems that you face? Do you feel like you know how to solve the problems that you face? And do you always follow through until something is solved? These are important questions to ask yourself, because being an advocate is not an easy road. There are lots of highs, but there are lots of lows. It can definitely be a rewarding experience. It can definitely be a healing experience, but trust me, it's like swimming upshore many times. It's not going to go as smoothly as you like. It's not going to be as easy as you hope it to be. And not everybody cares and has the same passion you do. And so therefore, they're not going to come to the situation the same way you are approaching it with urgency. I'd like to say that it's important to have certain soft skills. I saw this word cloud and I thought it was great because patience was in the center. Now I know it's not always easy to be patient, but things take time. Because the reality is that most of the systems that we are advocating for, they're broken. And so they didn't break overnight. It took a long time for them to get where they are. And so to expect things to change rapidly, not really realistic. And it's important to be flexible. A lot of people think they are until they're tested. You also need to be a great communicator, a good listener. You need to have confidence in yourself. You need to be detail oriented. You need to know how to build relationships. And the list goes on. And so I think that it's important to realize that it's not just passion that will make you an effective advocate. There's so much more. And it is a full-time job if you make it that. But I also want to say that there are communication skills that will be important. And at the end of the day, the objective is you want to be taken seriously, you want to be understood and respected. And you need to be mindful of your tone, your volume, and the attitude that you have. When you communicate, it needs to be with intention. What is your purpose? Do you know what your message is? Oftentimes, yes, we know our stories, we know what we've gone through, but your message needs to be concise. And one of the things that I appreciate about the symposium, there is a session on how to tell your story, because the reality is that you don't have a lot of time. And so being able to tell your story concisely and clearly is important. And the question is, who can help you resolve this issue? Now with Hill Day coming up, and I know that there's going to be a session on that as well, you'll get some tools. You'll get the information, you'll get a packet of information. So you don't have to do a lot of the lift and the legwork, but it's always important to know who you should be reaching out to for what your desired resolve is. You also need to think about the method that you will be using to communicate. Is this going to be an in-person? Is it going to be a phone call? Is it going to be a letter or email? And then if it's in person, when can it possibly take place? Or if you're going to call, is there a certain time frame that you need to call within? Or if it's a bill that needs to get more co-sponsors, what's the urgency in terms of sending that letter or that email? And at the end of the day, as we're trying to build relationships with the people that we're trying to get to help us to move the needle, realize it's not about you. You need to make sure that whatever things are being scheduled, it's a mutually convenient time. And with Hill Day, there's usually a particular day. Arrangements have been made in order to have meetings. And unfortunately, sometimes the meetings don't go as planned in terms of time, etc. But flexibility, adaptability, that's where that comes in. And then also, you always need to know how much time is being offered to you. Because I will say that if you're doing the Hill Day with NCCS, there's a certain amount of time that is allotted. You're not going to that meeting by yourself. And so each of the members of your team for a particular meeting will also want to be able to tell their story. And so you need to know how you're going to break up the time to make sure everyone's voice gets heard. But in addition to that, you actually address the priority of the meeting, whichever bill that is. So there are definitely different types of advocacy. Again, I provide a link for what NCCS has on advocacy. I mentioned to you that I started out with self-advocacy. I started out thereafter, rolled into doing community outreach advocacy, and I still do that today. And I do work with several research teams around the country. So I'm involved in research advocacy. But, you know, for NCCS, we're talking about legislative advocacy, taking action to influence social, political, and economic systems to bring about change for groups of people. And so I think it's important for you to actually understand what public policy, cancer policy is. And so NCCS has information on that on their website as well. So legislative advocacy, there's definitely a section on the NCCS's site. But I think that we, for the purposes of, you know, Hill Days and lobby days, etc., is to look at it from 2 points. Federal advocacy. It's important if you're going to be an advocate, Not only do you need to know your story, but you need to be informed about government. And so knowing the three branches of government and their function is helpful and important. And here's a link to give you more information. You also need to know who your representatives are. Oftentimes, when you're doing a Hill Day with an organization, they utilize your zip code and they pull out all the information and they take care of everything. But it's still something that's important for you to know. Because if perhaps, your zip code got transposed and they think you're living someplace that you're not, and they're setting you up with a representative that's not yours, if you don't know who your representative is, you can't flag it to say, hey, there's a problem. We need to figure this out. It's also important for you to know how to look up co-sponsors and other important information regarding legislation, and to know the congressional committees and subcommittees. And sometimes you can't get to DC, but you can definitely do something in your home state. So finding out who those representatives are, as well as it was mentioned earlier, the state comprehensive cancer coalitions, you could also get involved there. And so these are available sites for you. And I would just encourage you to start to do your homework in order to be able to be informed and empowered. So I'd like to say that, when I first got started in the advocacy world, we did not have the benefit of social media, but we have it today. And so many people utilize Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube in order to get messages out, to connect with others, in order to be able to make sure that your reach is there. But although social media is available, I still think that some do like the old-fashioned thing, and traditional media is still helpful too. So writing the letter to the editor or writing an op-ed are also ways to be advocating and getting information out so that people are informed. Because at the end of the day, most people know the word cancer, but unless you've been on the cancer journey, you really do not know all the nuances of it. And so these are ways for you to help educate others. Teachable moments, I like to say, because at the end of the day, we want people to be more informed. So like I said earlier, self-care is a must. And as you see, I've put must in capital letters just for the emphasis of it all. This is hard work. It's work like no other. Many of us do have collateral damage from treatment, but we have a spirit that drives us. But it's important for us to be mindful that although we're driven, we're passionate, we really want to be purposeful, have meaningful lives, we must take care of ourselves. We can't forget how we got here. And at the end of the day, it is so important in your life, whether it's advocacy or on a personal level. After a cancer diagnosis, it's important to have boundaries. They play a vital role in how we interact with others and we allow them to interact with us. Recognizing and maintaining healthy boundaries is going to be critical. Many of us like to raise our hands and say we're going to do it all. Many of us don't follow what 2-year-olds do in terms of always saying no. There's nothing wrong with saying no. It's acknowledging your bandwidth. Everything isn't for you at every single moment. Sometimes you have to sit certain things out. And if you constantly are a person that always says yes, people are going to continue to put on your plate more than you can handle. And when you think that you're there and having support around you, and you find that you're there alone, it can be overwhelming and frustrating. And so I encourage you to be mindful of how many things you take on. And I also encourage you to make sure you set boundaries and you are sticking with them at the end of the day. It's also important for you to realize that patience, perseverance, and sustenance is important. I just want to say that it takes time to develop all the skills that are necessary to be an effective advocate. And I think it's nothing wrong with trying to find a mentor or a buddy, someone who's been on this journey, who can tell you the rules of the road, best practices. I like to say it just gives you a head start in being able to avoid or pitfalls and landmines. The reality is change is a long and often slow process, but don't be discouraged. Please know that your contributions to progressive change is valued. And you will find naysayers along the way, and you will find people who are unhelpful. And yes, resistance does come with the territory. And I just encourage you to pace yourself, because it often feels like a triathlon and not a sprint. And I also encourage you to manage your expectations. Although you may care about your particular disease and the community, not everyone does. And so if you expect that everyone is going to be on board and be empathetic, you might be disappointed when that doesn't always happen. And so what they often say is expectations is the blueprint for disappointment. I just encourage you now to remember one of the things that I've said, a lot of things so far, but one of the things that I would encourage you to remember, self-care is a must, and manage your expectations and pace yourself. Because if you're not enjoying this experience, you're probably stressing from the experience, and stress is not going to help you in your overall health and well-being. So some tips I want to give you to be an effective advocate. You need to have a plan, a strategy. You need to understand what the issue or issues are and be willing to gather the information so that you know the facts and you can speak to that. Because the reality is that oftentimes the people that you are talking to, they know nothing. And so you have to actually educate them. You need to be organized and be prepared. Whatever you may have done prior to hearing the words, you have cancer, you know that you don't go into meetings unprepared and half-baked. This is no different. If you're meeting in person, be on time, be professional. Don't pretend as if, you know what, because, they tell you that, the hallways are long and you need to wear comfortable shoes, that you think you can come in ripped jeans, because we are visual people. And at the end of the day, people make judgments about you just based on your appearance. And so you need to treat this as this is work in order to be taken seriously. And again, I'm just going to emphasize the importance of being patient and not losing your composure because things don't line up the way you had anticipated. Now, I know that doing your first Hill Day can be intimidating, but I encourage you to realize they're human beings and they don't really even know what you're coming to talk about for the most part. And so you have an opportunity to educate them. And also be mindful of how your nervousness is exhibited, because you don't want to be too chatty and not give your other team members an opportunity to talk, or you don't want to just be rambling on and forget why you're there and what the point of your meeting is. You don't really want to be that person that's sitting there drenched because you're sweating. So just be mindful and prepare as best as you can. It's important for you to get your points across, so don't let others interrupt you, so that you don't lose your trend of thought, but at the same time, you don't interrupt others either. It's important when you deal with Hill Days and your legislative bodies that you identify who the gatekeeper is. You want to establish a relationship with that person and build trust, so that actually when you send an email or you pick up the phone and make a phone call, they know who you are and they take your call or they respond to your email. Because this is all about building relationships if you're going to be an effective advocate. It's important for you to say what's on your mind, but realize there's a difference between assertion and aggression or agitation. And never forget, when you're telling your story, you are the expert. So tell your story clearly and proudly. And at the end of the day, at all Hill Day meetings, someone on the team needs to take notes to make sure you capture and you can let the staff at NCCS know, or whichever other organization you may do Hill Days for, what are the follow-ups? What was the sense? Is the representative willing to potentially be a sponsor, a co-sponsor, sign on? What's the action? What are the next steps? And be sure to always take a business card from whoever you've spoken to, so that you can send the thank you email or letter thereafter, acknowledging the time that they have given you to address the agenda's priority. I also just want to say documentation is important. So I've spoken about note taking, but I think that if you were perhaps dealing with stuff over the phone, create worksheets, create logs, so that you have documentation, you know who you spoke to when, so that when you follow up, you have those details. And there's nothing wrong if you're going to do advocacy over the telephone, write a script and practice it. Remember your phone manners. Be assertive, make sure you're talking to the right person, and before you get off the phone, recap who's going to do what and what should be expected thereafter, so that if follow-up is needed, you'll know exactly what you're following up for. And perhaps you like to write. You're an excellent writer. Make sure that your business letter or email, it has the right format and content, and always make sure that you follow up with a thank you letter or email. And if you're going someplace in person, remember to prepare for the meeting. Don't go to any meeting unprepared, not knowing who's going to do what, who's going to cover what aspect of the ask. Dress professionally. Be mindful of your body language. Again, we're visual people. Listen more than you talk. Don't forget to say thank you. Don't forget to send a thank you email or letter. Don't forget, and I didn't put this here, but often we can't do it this year, but it's always great to take a photo. Memories are good. And follow up if that's appropriate. So I always like to think about advocacy from the standpoint or the lens. You need to do what you love and love what you do. Because if advocacy is not fueling you, it's then going to tear you apart. You need to be balanced and make sure that all that you're doing is what you can actually handle because you have the bandwidth. And don't ever forget the reason why you potentially got involved in advocacy was because of a diagnosis or a diagnosis of a loved one. And remember, teamwork makes dream work. So I leave you to ponder. The essential conditions of everything you do must be by choice, your choice. It should be your love, and it should be something you're passionate about. At this particular time, I'd like to open it up for questions and answers. So Lauren, are you going to pose the questions to me?
Yeah, so does everyone, I'm hoping everyone has access to their chat box. It should be right below their screen. It looks like a few of us have actually already started doing it, like Bethany, Judy, Adam. If you guys have specific questions for Desiree, can you type your message there in the chat box? And then I can prompt Desiree by reading the question and she can answer for you guys. I actually, in the meantime, have a question for you, Desiree. Oh, it looks like we do have a question.
Sure.
Oh, it says, great advice, thank you. So my question is, first of all, how many Hill Days have you been to and what have you personally found to be really successful and what's brought you to learn all these great tips?
Well, I don't know the number of Hill Days that I've done, but I will say, being that this was going to be my 6th CPAT, I've definitely done 6 with this organization. And so I think it's probably safe to say that I've done at least 20 if I think about some of the other organizations that I've done that with lobby days. And so for me, I would say that it's been great when I've had the opportunity to meet as a New York State representative. I've enjoyed those experiences first to get to know other advocates from my area. Also an opportunity to potentially see whether there are future collaborations depending on which advocates are there. But also just, I would say that it's always very prideful to go as a state. But I also can say that I appreciate the opportunities. I haven't had much success, if I'm candid, in, with one of my representatives. His office is often very unresponsive. So I never really get to see them in DC, but I have made it a visit when he's in town. So that's again, representatives are special. So one of the things that I often say is that, we have to remember that we did put them in office. So we need to let them know when they're not really doing what they said they would be doing at the end of the day, which is serving the people.
Right, right. So we have a really good question from Woody. He says,
"Hi, Woody."
Hi, Woody. So how do you craft your elevator speech for the greatest impact?
Well, for me, I think it's important to write it down, right? I think that oftentimes, we think that we can just say it off the cuff because we've lived it, but it's very easy to get distracted. So I think that if you write down the key parts of your story, yes, it's important to, if you have had negative experience, to share them, but you want to strike the right balance. Because at the end of the day, oftentimes who you're meeting with may be a chief of staff or it may be a legislative aide, and they're young. And so you don't necessarily want to do the fear factor with them because they don't often have enough life experience to be able to handle that type of thing very well. So it's important for you to be able to craft your story with the right bits in terms of who you are, where you're coming from, if you're a constituent, what your cancer diagnosis was. You could talk about whether it was early stage or advanced stage, and basically say that, you're here to represent a particular organization, and this is the agenda. But you're going to let your other colleagues, be able to do their intros before you get into more of why we're there today. But I think the elevator pitch, as they like to call it, it should be no more than 2 minutes. And it should get to a point where you can actually rattle it off without a cheat sheet. And so it's something that you may have to write for a bit and keep tweaking. But I always say practice, 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 because practice makes perfect. And when you go out and represent NCCS or any other organization, or even if you were doing something for yourself, you want to represent well, because you have one shot to make a good impression.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question with a bit of context. It says, in one of my senator's offices, the first time I visited, I met with the chief legal counsel regarding cancer legislation. But this person isn't sure if the healthcare legislative staffer was unable or unavailable, or if this individual covers oncology legislation. She's met on 3 separate occasions and exchanged numerous emails and calls. Do you think she should also try to connect with the healthcare aide on this particular case? And how would you handle a legislator's office that is cold and seems to not care about your issue?
Well, I definitely am an optimistic person, and so this may come across as a Debbie Downer comment. Some of the offices are cold, and so you just have to prepare yourself for the chill and adjust accordingly. And so what I would say is that what I've seen is that oftentimes, not depending on the season in terms of tenure of a representative, they have different staff members and some have more staff than others. And so there are times where, depending on what's going on, everyone's stretched. And so they have a choice. They can either cancel on you or they can just have someone meet with you. And oftentimes they will just have someone meet with you versus canceling. And I think at the end of the day, although it may not be ideal based on that person's title, you still have an opportunity because trying to get appointments oftentimes is not easy. And so to me, any foot in the door is in the door. And so I'm going to take that as an opportunity to tell my story and make my ask. And so again, I think that it's important to realize that this is about a relationship. In an ideal world, you'll have an opportunity to meet with the same person or be in touch with the same person as opposed to getting passed around. And so in that instant, I would say work on building the relationship. Think about what you would normally do to try to build a relationship with a colleague, and use some of those techniques to be able to assist you. Now, if it's a situation where you're getting passed around to different people, you can always inquire, well, what happened to Lauren? Is she still here? Did Lauren give you the paperwork? Of the last discussion we had, or, so do you have the background? And so I would just take an opportunity to kind of put it on them to let them know, I'm not new to this. I've been here before. I don't have the same person. And although I'm prepared to tell you all what I've shared before, I just want to know, are you prepared for this conversation? And so once you can get a sense of what is happening, you may need to pivot often. But that's where the flexibility and the adaptability comes from. So I hope that that's helpful.
Yeah, that reminds me about why patience was one of the biggest words in the word cloud that you put. How do you, from my perspective, how do you personally deal with what it kind of feels like rejection from being passed around? How do you deal with that with your own feelings? Do you let it affect you?
At the end of the day, when I had my first cancer diagnosis, I was introduced to a book called The Four Agreements by Miguel Ruiz. And that actually became, something really integral in my life. And one of the agreements is don't take things personal. Because the reality is it has nothing to do with me. And the truth of the matter is that oftentimes people are stretched more than they should be. I don't know what was going on in their life before my meeting. I don't know what's, I have no idea. I know what I'm coming to do. And so again, for me, it's really, and all of this, what I'm saying, it doesn't come overnight because we all are human beings and we have sensitivity. And we all want to know that when we have something to say, somebody wants to listen. And so I can understand all of those emotions. They are real, they will occur, but you have to be able to put things into buckets. And you have to remember that this is business. This may not be the person that you're going to have, go on vacation with. This is not the person you're going to have coffee and dinner with. At the end of the day, they're trying to do their job, whether they're good at it or not, and that's always questionable. But you have to realize you're here as an advocate to do a job. And so the same way you would deal with uncomfortable situations when you got paid, you also have to bring that same structure, that same posture. And at the end of the day, do not take things personal. It has nothing to do with you. You just need to stay focused. And know that you may not hit the ball at the first try. It may take several tries, but I encourage you to keep trying because if this is something that is important, then this is what you need to do.
Mm-hmm. And so when you say keep trying, what would be your suggestions for overcoming resistance? Like if a staffer is not engaged or multitasking or just ignoring you, how would you pursue that conversation in real life?
Well, I look at them like, some of us have doctors that are better than others. And I think that most of us will say that at some particular point they went to a doctor and they were there talking and the doctor was either looking at their phone, the doctor was looking at a screen, the doctor was somewhere else. And so the same way I would encourage a patient to always make sure that you bring the doctor to center and make sure that they know that you're there. You're there for a reason and you have something to talk about. The same thing I would say would be appropriate with whoever is a staff member there, you know, because they could be thinking about the next meeting they're about to go to. And so it's really important for you, if you're the one in the group that has been designated to move the conversation, then it's important for you to then reframe things and then refocus the individual, whether it's saying, and so this on this particular page, they're usually one pagers that you give them, you know, you start to talk about a particular thing, or you ask them a question that would clearly show that they weren't paying attention so that you could then bring them back. You know, there's tons, but again, I think it's important for you to know who you are and what your comfort level is, because some people can do it rather smoothly, and then other people will definitely lose their composure, get a little nasty. And at the end of the day, we know that you don't get bees, you know, with vinegar, you need honey. And so at the end of the day, it's really important to make sure that you keep yourself together. You don't lose your focus as to why you're there. And remember that not only are you representing yourself, you're more than likely representing an organization. And we're trying to build relationships. We're trying to build trust. And if we don't have ourselves together and we show out in ways that are not becoming, then potentially that's one less person you might be able to count on when you need them most.
Desiree, have you always been this confident?
Well, let's put it this way. You know, I would say, you know, my background, I tell people I don't really talk about this often because I eat, sleep, and drink cancer now. But my background was Wall Street. And I have to say, you know, working in Wall Street as an African-American woman, I was an anomaly. And so it required me to be able to move through territories that many did not move through before me. And so I didn't have a roadmap or a blueprint, but I knew that I did not want to be eaten by the sharks. So I definitely needed to be able to manage. And so I spent years being able to navigate the walls and the streets of Wall Street. And I say that background has actually helped me to be a more effective advocate and confident advocate and comfortable advocate at the end of the day, just because of that background.
And Woody said, so
Woody's my best friend. Woody's the only one talking to me besides you. Okay. Hi, Woody. What's Woody saying?
Woody actually, he knows the 4 agreements, which are be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, which I do all the time. Don't make assumptions and always do your best. I've never heard about the 4 agreements. How did you find out about that?
Well, I was actually, I want to say I was dealing with recovery from surgery and was home. And I can't say that I used to I was never home, but now I had that luxury. And I turned on the television and Oprah had Miguel Ruiz on her show. And he was talking about that book. And although, again, I wasn't a talk show person, what he said caught my attention and I stopped. And I was like, okay, I got to write down this book. I got to get this book. And I read it often because there are times when life gets difficult that you can forget, right, to not take things personal. But at the end of the day, it's important that you don't. Because so many things happen in life that just is unsettling. And it's quick to, you know, take a hit and feel it's about you, but half the time and probably all the time, it has nothing to do. You're just in the wrong place at the right time to get the hit.
Okay, so when making presentations, any suggestions that you may have for overcoming imposter syndrome?
I need a little bit of clarification on that question.
Well, it didn't actually come from me. Thank you,
Oh,
everybody.
oh, okay. Can whoever sent that in, can they clarify what they mean by making presentations and imposter syndrome? And is there any other question while that person is typing?
Like not feeling adequate or confident.
Well, I guess that my question to that person would be, your presentation, what is it on? Is it about your disease? Is it about yourself? I would need to know what the subject matter is, because if you're going to get up to do a presentation, first of all, you shouldn't be doing a presentation that you don't know anything about. And so if you are going to do a presentation, again, you need to do your homework. You need to be prepared. And so once you've done the research in order to get the facts, because I think that it's important that when you go out and represent, you're always giving the facts. And if someone were to pose a question that you didn't know the answer to, you needed to be comfortable to say, I don't know, but get their contact information and follow up with the facts. The facts are important. We see where we are, and I won't get political, even though we should be in DC at this time, to say that, we've already seen how much facts are not available, and the importance of fact in terms of being able to help versus hinder. And so I think that, for me, once you've done the research and you put together a presentation, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to know everything, but you make sure that what you're conveying in that presentation is factual. Anything else that you don't know, you can always get answers to. So anytime you say yes to doing a presentation, you need to be saying yes because you feel confident that you can share something and educate somebody at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. And what if, I mean, a lot of it has to do with personal insight and what you've gone through in your experience. So, how do you share that confidently without wanting to cry or overcoming your emotions?
And that's one of the reasons why I said earlier that it's important for you wanting to get involved in something, having meanings to your life after a diagnosis. You shouldn't do it too soon. Because the reality is that after a diagnosis, while you're going through treatment, and potentially even months later, you're raw, you're vulnerable, and anything can be a trigger. Anything can set you off. And the truth of the matter is that people might feel bad watching that, but at the end of the day, you didn't teach them anything, and you didn't give them any insight or hope, because now you have actually potentially created fear, right? Because they don't understand why you're reacting this way. They know that you've gone through something, but your reaction initially, when we see people crying, we have empathy, but then thereafter we have confusion. And so I always like to say that, again, it's practice. Practice makes perfect. At the end of the day, it's important when you want to get out and tell your story, you have to practice it. You have to be able to know, what things potentially might trigger an emotion that might distract from the message you're trying to give. Because at the end of the day, you want people to walk away with some nuggets. And if all they can remember is you crying and blowing your nose, you've not done your job. You were not effective at the end of the day. And you may need to maybe not take some more time to heal, because I also think that one of the things that, this is not exactly related, but it is a part of advocacy, is your mental health. We need to be mindful of our emotions. Sometimes, we go through life, we go through adversity, and we don't feel, we don't acknowledge our feelings. We stuff them because we think that we got to keep it moving. We got more important things to do, and all whatever else we may tell ourselves. But the reality is that if you don't ever process whatever you've gone through, if you don't grieve for the loss that you've experienced from a diagnosis, you can't heal. You've just left an open wound. And we all know open wounds do fester. And then when they do, they become something uglier than they need to be. And so
Mhm.
I just encourage people to be mindful of where they are on the journey, and make sure they always give themselves space, and that they're gentle with themselves and give themselves permission to say, I can't do this right now, but maybe another time.
Mm. Wow. Can I call you every time I have a bad day?
Most definitely. Put me on speed dial. I'm more than happy to, because, the journey of life is not easy. And
Mhm.
then you get hit with a diagnosis. And the reality is, it's definitely not going to be easy at all. And the life that you knew is gone. And I think that oftentimes we keep wanting to go back to the way things were. And that's just not realistic. And so that just sets us up for a whole host of things. And so I just think that, it's hard, but we have to take the time in order to make sure that we're whole in mind, body, and spirit. Because if we aren't in balance, we will be imbalanced at the end of the day, and we can't live our best life. And the reason why we've taken all the treatments that we've done, whatever treatment we've done, is because we want to live life fully.
I love that. So specifically, after a presentation, what is the appropriate manner of follow-up that you would recommend?
Well, they say that actually, if you've had a meeting within 2 to 3 days, immediately you should be following up to just say thank you, right? Because you want to, I like to say everything I talk about, I'm always talking about relationships. You know that if you went on a date, you're going to try to follow up right away so that you stay relevant on that person's radar. And so similarly, right, if you've had a meeting, or if you've had a phone call, follow up to just say, hey, you know what? I thank you for your time. Even if the outcome of that meeting wasn't exactly what you expected, you still need to say thank you. And then use that as an opportunity to say, I hope that I'll be able to reach back to you in a couple of weeks or a month, and just establish that. And so I think that, we don't, and I understand that oftentimes after you've come back from a lot of trips and lobby days, etc., you've put certain things on hold. And so life can get hectic. But I think it's important that we make sure that we reach out to these people that we're now trying to build a relationship with in a real short time frame. So that we're on their radar. And perhaps if we had left them with some ask, or we've left them to then speak to the representative, we've reminded them we were there. Because again, they're human. And at the end of the day, they too can drop the ball.
Yeah. And is that through like a call, an email, a handwritten note that you do that?
It depends, right? I definitely will say that, most people now have emails. And so I definitely am someone that will utilize an email. However, if in the course of the conversation, it appears that somebody's old fashioned, I have note cards. I don't have a problem dropping, a line into a note and sending that off, to them as well. But there are times where, if at the end of the meeting they say, well, feel free to call. If you took the business card, you have a number. If not, I would say that calling would not be my first thing unless our engagement was on the phone. Then I would follow up with another call. But if it was an in-person, I would do an email or a letter, or a note, something of that nature, as a follow-up.
Okay. So I looked at my phone, it said 3:15, and I swear that was 5 seconds ago. So it's really 3:28. There's just one more other question. What are NCCS top legislative priorities at the moment? Right now, we're really focusing on expanding paid leave and provisions for that. We're gonna talk about that even more next week in those sessions. And if you have any other questions that we couldn't cover, you can email me specifically. I'd love to give Desiree's number, but that's
Well, actually, um, let me see. I think I still have my screen here. I don't know why it's not advancing. Um, there we go. So
Yeah.
in this day and age, I know everyone likes to take screenshots and all of that other type of stuff. So I just want to say it was a privilege to be here and present. Again, I wish I were actually in front of you to have met all of you, but I would like to just provide you with my contact information. So if you have any questions that you didn't get to ask because you were that shy person right now, that's okay. Feel free to email me. And this is my number. You can definitely call me and leave me a message there, and I'll get back to you. And for those of you that love social media, I just thought I'd give you my Twitter handle, even though I will say that I am the worst when it comes to social media. But one day I'll have enough bandwidth to get my social media game up. But I thank all of you for being here. I thank you for joining the NCCS family, and I wish you much success in your advocacy endeavors, and wish you good health and continue to stay safe and well.
Great. Thank you so much, Desiree.
Take care.
You're the best. There's just one more note. So we're actually going to go back to the main stage. If you guys want to go over there, you just have to go to the email that we sent you. It should come from Lindsay and log into that link.